Hello and welcome to the Audio Epic Storytelling Podcast. And today's topic is...
storytelling in adaptations.
Yeah. So we're talking about, for example, when you turn a novel into a movie.
Yeah, that's the first thing that comes to mind, obviously. For example, like Harry Potter or The Hunger Games, The Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, etc.
Yes.
You would be surprised which movies were actually novels first.
I think most movies these days, unless they're sequels or reboots.
Very often, yeah.
Or sequel, reboot, remake things. And then, of course, you could also do it the other way around. You could turn a movie into a novel, like, these novelizations that they're always talking about.
Like they did with Star Wars.
Yeah, they did that for Star Wars.
Like when you see the cover of a Star Wars movie in a bookshop, and then you realize, hey, it's not the DVD, it's actually a book.
Yeah, this DVD is made of paper. That's strange. Yeah.
So we have that too, although it's less common. Then we have video games turned to movies.
Oh, yeah. Those are notoriously difficult to do, apparently, or at least they get criticized a lot.
Yeah, the audience often doesn't like them.
And we'll talk about that. And then you can also have, of course, comic book adaptations, which I think is a bit different from novel adaptations.
Yeah, right, because you already have this visual aspect, right?
Yeah.
And I think those movies are often very dark and serious compared to the comics themselves.
Yeah. Certainly in the case of Man of Steel versus, those old Superman comics, very different. Even Tintin was a little bit darker and more mature than the
comic book. It was a story for children or teenagers.
It's just whenever I hear the term dark and mature, I always have to laugh. Darker and more mature. Okay, anyway. And I guess we'll have a fifth category of miscellaneous adaptations. People make all kinds of weird adaptations, like the Pirates of the Caribbean movies.
Yeah, those are movies based on a theme park ride, actually. So
yeah, or you could base a movie on toys.
The Lego movie.
Yeah, right. I was thinking of Transformers, but you're right, Lego, of course.
Yeah, I don't know about Transformers. Didn't they make the series first and then the toys were kind of a merchandise or something?
Yeah, I don't know. Did they make the TV show first or did they make the toys first? I don't know.
Well, they seem to go along very well, TV shows and toys, so...
You could mix comics and toys and movies, etc., and put it all in a blender, and then you get the Lego Batman movie.
Yeah. And if you take one character out of that movie, you can make a spin-off of that. And
yeah.
Wow, there's so many places to go with this.
Yeah, a while ago I was in a store and I saw a Lego set, a play set, and it was a Lego play set based on the Lego Batman movie. And so I thought, wow, this is a toy based on a movie that is a sequel to a movie based on a toy, but it's also an adaptation of a comic book character that was put into a movie. And I was thinking, welcome to 2018.
You lost me at sequel.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you have novels turned to audio drama.
Right, of course. We should, of course, mention that since we are audio dramatists ourselves.
Oh, right.
There are some great examples. The Chronicles of Narnia focus on the family. Radio Theatre made a very good adaptation of that series.
Please, Aslan, can anything be done to save Edmund?
All shall be done, but it may be harder than you think.
And The Lord of the Rings.
The Lord of the Rings by BBC is, I think, my favorite audio drama of all time. Surprise, surprise. But also Ursula Le Guin's A Wizard of Earthsea was done by BBC and was very good. Judi Dench was the narrator. By the way, when it comes to radio drama based on a novel, I think, of course, The War of the Worlds needs to be mentioned. they really used the medium to its full effect. And then, of course, that was turned into a movie. And then they remade that movie, and so on.
And so on. Okay, so let's start with novel to screen. So when they turn a novel to a movie. Overall, we kind of found that the audience or fans of the books are often very critical and seem to forget that this is a completely different medium. So, in our opinion, a screen adaptation of a novel should not be a scene-by-scene translation to a film script.
Oh, no. Very often that's a bad idea. Because, well, there are a bunch of challenges that you have to meet. For example, a movie will inevitably be shorter than the book. That was one of the things that they had to really, really work on in the Lord of the Rings adaptations. And even then, they did the extended editions, and even then they don't have everything at all. Far from it.
Yeah, and once you've seen the extended editions, you never want to go back to the theatrical editions.
No. You're right. In a movie, you have to take into account the fact that people are sitting in a chair for X amount of minutes, not being able to pee or anything.
Right.
So there's less time to dilly-dally.
So no wandering around through the forest, the weenies by the campfire with friends, bringing every meal to screen.
Yeah, and of course those, especially in Tolkien's work, that's some of the most atmospheric stuff. The stuff that's most typical of his work is that wandering through the forest and weenies by the campfire stuff. So they do have to put it in the movie a little bit, but they have to tone it down a lot. So that's
right, and also in the books you get the feeling that everything is less urgent. That
you can do that in a book.
They have time to have a good dinner and talk, and
you can do that in a book. Yeah,
but I think in a movie you cannot do that in a movie because people have a limited amount of time to invest in that movie, and that's why I think it's interesting that they had the chase by Azog in The Hobbit, because it makes the whole
sense
story
of urgency
more urgent. Yeah, exactly.
In a movie, you do need to ramp that up a bit. It's a different language. It's the language of cinema, and it's just expectations are different.
That way you don't feel like they accidentally turn up at certain locations, but that they are really driven there by forces.
Everything has to be a bit more interconnected, a bit more cause and effect in a movie, I think. In a book, that's less necessary, because you're allowed to meander a bit, you're allowed to wander around a bit. And that's part of the wonder of a book. There are elements in I know we're talking a lot about Lord of the Rings now, but there's a good reason for that. It's my favorite book, and it's an incredibly successful adaptation. There are elements in that book, like Tom Bombadil, obviously, if you've read it. There's a whole sequence in the early parts of the journey when the hobbits wind up in the old forest, and they meet Tom Bombadil, who is this mysterious character who lives there. That whole episode is not in the movie, and on the one hand you could say that's sad, but on the other hand it's kind of logical that they left it out, because it doesn't have any really relevant elements concerning the main plot. How are we going to get rid of the ring? That's not really there in that whole episode. So if you gotta leave something out, and you gotta start cutting somewhere, that's the first thing you'd cut out.
Right. It would have been worse if they had cut something else out that was essential to the plot.
Exactly, yeah.
Also, the events in the Old Forest, they moved those to Fangorn, which I thought was interesting, because I think it's important that you take into account that some of the audience may not have read the book, and it has to stand by its own, the movie, that they would be confused with all those forests. In the book you have all these different forests, and they really have a different atmosphere, and they're all awesome and they should all be there. But in a movie I think it's very hard, especially for people who haven't read the books, to imagine all these different kinds of forests and still differentiate them all.
Yeah, that's true. And I think also the fact that, Merry and Pippin are strangled by, well, they survive, but they're strangled by a tree with its roots. That whole event in the movie in Fangorn is a bit of a nod, sort of homage to the sequence in the book that didn't make it.
Away with you. You should not be waking. Eat earth, dig deep, drink water, go to sleep. Away with you.
Right. Also, you have novels in which riddles and puzzles play a very big part. And actually, in those novels, that's the pleasure of reading the book often. For example, The Name of the Rose. That novel has a very high level of puzzles and information.
Right.
And
I did read Name of the Rose, and I also saw the movie. And it's true that in the book there's a lot of labyrinthine stuff with, puzzles and puns and...
Yeah, and that's what I loved about it. So I never got to see the movie because I was afraid it was going to be disappointing.
The movie does a good job of sort of translating the plot itself as a detective story to the screen.
Okay.
But then the all the sort of more cerebral stuff is sort of, left out.
Yeah, and it's only logical. It's very hard to keep it all in there. I think there are lots of ways to make a movie shorter without leaving important parts of the novel out.
Yeah, of course. If you do that, then the whole thing could collapse.
Yeah.
Potentially. Now, so we've been talking about how movies are always shorter than books. I mean, I don't think there are many exceptions. Some people would say The Hobbit might be an exception.
When all good stories deserve embellishment.
But on the other hand, there's also the danger of making the movie too short. I think that's an issue that especially came up in the past more than now. When you look at older movie adaptations of books, in that regard, I think movies have become better at adapting novels. Because in the past, very often they had budget constraints, they had special effect constraints. They couldn't put everything they wanted onto the screen. And so, you had the Never-Ending Story, which cut the book in half and only told the first part of it.
Right, and replaced the dragon with a flying golden retriever.
Yes, that too. That was an interesting choice. And that was actually still quite a good adaptation. But there are many examples of older adaptations that just were so constrained that they either really changed the book or they condensed it so that it lost its emotional core. For example, the David Lynch adaptation of Dune suffers from that, I think. It's a remarkable effort. I mean, you have to respect the movie for what it managed to do in terms of design, etc. It was quite amazing, really. But unfortunately, Dune is a great novel and it has great characters. But the movie just tries to condense all of that incredibly complicated stuff, the all of the world building and all of the detail into 2 hours, and it's so cramped that it feels like you're always moving from plot point to plot point. Now we got to do this, now that's got to happen, and as a result, the characters and their feelings, the emotional core, is actually lost along the way, which is the real essence of the story.
Yeah, and Dune is an incredibly rich story. I think it's a good example of one of those novels that could better be turned into a series or a mini-series to fully work. Because I think a movie is just too short to...
You might try it in 2 movies or a long movie. I've heard that they're actually going to make a new Dune movie.
Oh, I would be curious about that.
Yeah, and it's going to be directed by Denis Villeneuve, who also made the new Blade Runner and Arrival, which was quite a good movie, I think.
All right. Okay.
And it wasn't a sequel or an adaptation.
For a change, yeah. Another thing they can do on screen with novels is change the characters, and they can do quite lots of things with them. They can delete characters, like they did with Tom Bombadil in The Lord of the Rings, but they can also merge or split characters, merge two characters or sometimes three, and split them. For example, if they have a character with two distinct qualities or characteristics, that they cut them into two separate characters.
Now, why would you do that?
Well, probably for political correct reasons. For example, there are only guys, so we just split one character into a man and a woman or something. I don't know.
Well, that's strange. That's just weird. When it comes to merging characters, I can see how that can be expedient in a sort of shorter, simpler adaptation from book to movie. They did that in the second Jurassic Park
The Lost World
book. Yeah, the Lost World. In the book, there are two characters. One is a paleontologist, who is this very eccentric guy. And the other character is Ian Malcolm's girlfriend. And in the movie, there's only Ian Malcolm's girlfriend, and she happens to be a paleontologist.
Yeah, exactly. I didn't know that.
And unfortunately, her character is a lot less interesting than that sort of very eccentric paleontologist was in the book.
Yeah, okay, yeah. I can see that. And I can see that if you merge a character that's split in the book, that then you often lose the dynamic between two interesting characters.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, imagine if they had merged Merry and Pippin into one character. I think a more Hollywood-type adaptation would have done that for Lord of the Rings. They would have said, you don't need those two hobbits. That's too complicated, too much to remember. Just turn it into one hobbit.
Pirin Randy took or something.
Yeah, they might have done that, but they didn't, luckily.
Yeah, or you can add characters as well, of course. It doesn't make the movie shorter, but it can be done for multiple purposes, actually, like they did with Tauriel in The Hobbit.
I think Tauriel was done partly because, I mean, in fact, they even say so explicitly in the making of. They wanted more female characters because The Hobbit, the book, doesn't have any female characters at all.
Except maybe for Thranduil, he's kind of I don't know.
Yeah, and other things that happen in adaptations is you might keep the same elements but move them to a different place in the story.
Yeah, like important lines from characters that are deleted, for example. They could be moved to other characters or to other moments in the story.
Yes, again, lots of instances of that in The Lord of the Rings. But I mean, I do also want to mention other things besides Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit. but it's so hard.
Anyway,
I think we should call it the Lord of the Rings podcast or something.
There are many of those, I think.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think it's important that you do respect the ending, though, of the novel.
I think so, yeah. We talked about this before with Planet of the Apes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I thought the remake was a bit unfortunate in that regard. I mean the Tim Burton remake, because the movies that they made afterwards with Andy Serkis, those are very good.
Yeah, and exactly. But I didn't mean only with remakes, but for example also with sequels by other creators, for example, like with Star Wars. If you establish a character has had a certain journey and has had a certain growth, you cannot simply delete that or reset that in a next movie. You really have to respect the fact.
You're talking about Han Solo.
The build-up of... Yeah. I'm talking about many characters in the new Star Wars movies.
I think it's something that happens when you have a long-running series. Things get reset. I hate that. It's why I don't watch TV series. I should do a whole episode on that. Why I don't watch TV series anymore.
Right. Well, on the whole, I would say that in an adaptation to screen, you should be loyal to the Sith.
What?
What?
The Sith? I mean, explain.
Well, I mean actually the spirit, the ideas, the truth, and the heart of a story. You should be true to the essence of the story.
I think you should trademark that or something.
Yeah, I was thinking about the Chronicles of Narnia, for example, how they kind of did that with the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
I think it was quite true to the themes of the...
but then the next movies, like Prince Caspian, they kind of suffered from that.
I think, the second...
They wanted to brand it more to a young, modern
They actually
audience.
wanted to brand it to an older audience, I think. They wanted to brand it to teenagers more than children. And wanted to make it cooler and darker and edgier.
Yeah.
And it sucked as a result.
I meant young from our perspective of being old people with...
No, I don't know. I still don't get that this is from the same guy because the first one, Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, was just it was a really faithful adaptation, and then the second one, Prince Caspian, it completely changes the story, puts in all kinds of crappy stuff that doesn't belong there. It's what happened.
On the whole,
Andrew
I
Adamson?
enjoyed them, but yeah, that first adaptation was still my favorite. The same goes for Stephen King novels, by the way. They are more often adapted by other directors, not just the same one, but they're also very hard to get right, I think. And one of the things I've noticed is, for example, The Shining. It's an interesting movie, but it doesn't quite get the feeling of a Stephen King novel right. It's a very distant atmosphere that doesn't really quite fit the Stephen King novel.
I guess it's sort of a Stanley Kubrick thing, because his movies always have this strange, cold, cerebral atmosphere to them that's a bit creepy and a bit unsettling.
Yeah, and that's not what the novels are about, I think. What strikes me in almost all Stephen King novels is that they kind of, even though they're very disturbing and creepy often, they end on a very positive and hopeful note. And I remember the ending of the short story, The Mist. And then I've seen the movie, and that ending was the most depressing ending I've ever seen. I'm not going to spoil it.
I'm not going to spoil it, but if you're struggling with suicidal thoughts, don't watch the movie The Mist.
Okay.
It's I thought it was a cruel ending that they did.
Yeah, and I remember the director actually being quite proud of it because it was kind of witty. But
no, I thought that was awful.
Compared to the ending in the short story, that was one of a very open ending, a very hopeful ending, and that's often the way Stephen King novels end. And I think it's a kind of a Stephen King thing to do, so you should keep faithful to that. Yeah.
I wonder what he thinks of it. I'd like to ask him. We'll have him on the show as a guest.
Right.
That might be good for our listenership, our ratings.
I do think it's logical that you have to reckon with a modern audience if you turn a novel into a movie, especially if it's an older novel and it's a very recent movie.
Right, yeah. Yeah, there are some things that you might have to explain or do differently. One thing that comes to mind is I noticed when they made the Lord of the Rings movies. Oh, I'm sorry.
You've watched those?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I don't know what the matter is with me, but I'm always thinking and talking about Lord of the Rings. Why is that?
Because it's the Skyrim of the novels.
So when they did Lord of the Rings, people had a lot of comments on all of the various stuff that they did that was different from the book, but there were some things that were, I think, issues that would have been a lot bigger for Professor Tolkien that audiences sort of just completely embraced and didn't even think about. I'm thinking of the fact that in the movie there's a scene of Aragorn and Arwen kissing several times even, I think. And I don't think Tolkien would have liked that at all. I think he would have objected to that. Nobody else made a comment about it. But the sort of relationship that Aragorn and Arwen have is a courtship, and not a relationship, certainly not in this sort of modern sense of dating. They don't have that. I think, you have to see Aragorn is more like a knight and Arwen is his lady. It's a very, it's a courtly romance. And it's only really at the very end when he has achieved his goals and he becomes king, and then the platonic elements can finally give way to real romance.
Which they did.
Yeah, they also did that. But I think, I mean, Tolkien would have objected to that quite strongly, I'm sure.
Yeah, possibly. I don't think most of the audience minded.
Though. No, for modern audiences, that's how you establish that, so they're in love with each other.
Some of those might not understand. In any way, I think it's important to take advantage of the medium and to add things to the story that are unique to the medium of a movie. You can do lots of things in a movie that you cannot do in a novel. So why not take advantage of that?
You have to do that. Otherwise, why are you even making a movie in the first place?
And to mention The Lord of the Rings again, think about the scene with the beacons. How awesome was that?
The lighting of the beacons.
Yeah.
That's a high point where they really chose to do something that you can only do in a movie. You cannot do it in any other medium.
They could never have done that in the book.
Yeah, and you have this wonderful, incredible rendition of the Gondor theme.
Yeah.
These epic landscapes. It's pure cinema, and it's a goosebumps moment. It's incredible.
Oh, there are more of those.
Yeah,
but there's a lot of humor added in the movie. I think that's something that really works for screen too. And the music, how could we not mention the music? You don't have that gorgeous Howard Shore score in the novel.
Well, you could listen to it while reading, but I know what you mean. These are the things that make a movie an interesting medium that deserves to exist alongside a book. And if you're just going to sort of slavishly follow the book and not use the unique qualities of the medium film, then you're not doing it right, I think.
Right. Maybe you can take a bit of time to conclude the first part, a novel to screen, and rant a bit about The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, so you can get it off your chest and then move on.
For some people, hating on the movies, I'm talking particularly about Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit now, is seen as a kind of badge of honor. But it so blatantly disregards all the hard work and passion and thought that went into the making of these movies. And I'm not saying they're perfect. I don't think a perfect adaptation exists. But what they did, what Peter Jackson and his team did with those movies, all 6 of them, is incredible, really, and deserves a lot of respect. If you love the book, you should realize that in the hands of somebody else, this would have been a nightmare. I mean, I read what John Boorman was planning to do with The Lord of the Rings back in the 70s. He wanted to make an adaptation of it, and I read what was going to be in it, and it was awful. Or the Beatles wanted to do their version of the Lord of the Rings with themselves as the main characters.
What?
I mean, it would have been horrible.
Wasn't there an animation?
There could have been the Ralph Bakshi animation movie is I think a terrible adaptation. I mean, there are people who actually think it's better than what Peter Jackson did. I think they've been smoking too much pipeweed, because let's be honest here. In that animated movie, they can't even get the names right of the characters.
Only because Aruman is kind.
It should have been his friend Aruman.
How long since Aruman?
Aruman.
Saruman, you idiot! It's pronounced Saruman! The S isn't silent!
You know, and here we have these 3 movies that were, you know, really obviously made with so much love and
6
and
of
passion.
them, actually. 6 Middle-earth movies.
Now
so.
6. If you really hate the Lord of the Rings and Hobbit movies, watch the making of documentaries. If you watch that, I mean, and you only have bad things to say about them, I think that's a bit harsh, because it's very obvious when you see those that a lot of love went into that. And
and respect for the source. I think they have really good arguments for every decision they made. And it's not like they made it on a whim. They really, really considered every option to make it as respectful and as loyal to the source as possible.
Yeah, especially for the Lord of the Rings. Now, with the Hobbit, they took more liberties. They did some more things that went a bit further. I would concede that. But even if you have issues with the Hobbit's films as an adaptation, I personally think that they still are faithful enough, because everything that's in the book is in there, and it's actually quite remarkable how close it really is. But okay,
and more, yeah.
But okay, even if you have issues with how the tone is different, or you might feel the spirit is different from the book, even if you take that into account, just watch those 3 movies, the Hobbit trilogy, on their own, just as fantasy adventure movies, and compare them with pretty much any other blockbuster of the past decade, and I think they are so clearly far better than all of that stuff, in my opinion at least. So I just wanted to get that off my chest.
We can move on to the next kind of adaptation then, novelization. So a movie turned into a novel.
Yeah, that was more popular back in the day, before people had VHS or DVDs, and, you know, before they were able to own a movie and watch it at home. I think that was a way to sort of...
I have experience with that, actually. I do remember a couple of books I read as a teenager based on Buffy the Vampire Slayer episodes, but other than that, I cannot remember reading a book that was based on a movie or a series or anything.
It was also a way to sort of know the story, if you wanted to, before you saw the movie.
Oh, right. So the novel came out first then, before the...
Yeah. Because in my case, I remember when Star Wars Episode 1 came out, The Phantom Menace. They had a novelization, and I read the novel before I saw the movie, so I already knew what was going to be in the story before I saw the movie.
Oh.
But that was also because films got released later in Belgium than they were in America back then.
That's no longer really the case, right?
No.
It got better now.
Because of piracy.
Now lots of movies just don't get released in Belgium, but that's another matter. Let's not talk about that.
So anyway, it's true that novelizations have their own sort of unique quality, I think, for specific kinds of movies. Yes. I think they work best for Star Wars, really.
Yeah, because there's a lot of lore and politics stuff.
Yeah, maybe Star Trek too, I don't know. But those kinds of movies that are set in these expansive universes with a lot of background information, you can explain that a bit more. You can expand on that a bit more in the book, and that's useful. I mean, that's interesting. And for example, the Star Wars novelizations, they do that.
Right. Shall we move on to video games turned to movies?
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh, yeah. Why uh-oh? Because they tend to have a bad reputation?
Yeah, they do.
I've heard that Resident Evil was such a bad movie. I think I've seen it, but I can't really remember what
I haven't seen it, but I know there are a bunch of them. They made a lot of Resident Evil movies, so they can't have been that bad, maybe?
No, I can't really remember what they were about, so...
I did remember the version of Tomb Raider with Angelina Jolie, and that wasn't very good.
Yeah, but there are exceptions, right? I remember I've seen Silent Hill. I used to be a very, very big horror fan, so everything creepy that I needed to see it at the theaters. So I watched Silent Hill, and I thought it was a very cool, atmospheric movie. I never played the game, so I can't really compare, but I thought the movie was pretty decent. And of course, I loved the Warcraft movie.
Yeah, Warcraft, that was a very good video game movie. And I never really played World of Warcraft. I did only play the strategy game, Warcraft 2. So I'm far from an expert. But I think that the reason why the Warcraft movie was a good movie was because they didn't adapt the plot of a video game into a movie, but they just took a bit of background lore or part of the sort of setting history, and they turned that into a movie.
Exactly, yeah. It's a new story set in the lore of Warcraft, but it's not really the main plot of the game.
Yeah, it's not the main quest of any World of Warcraft game.
I think there are various reasons why it's harder for movies based on games to work. For one, I think it's very hard because a game usually takes way more hours than a movie does.
Yeah, and all those scenes of your main character collecting 10 wolf skins and bringing them back.
That's, of course, very essential to the story. But also, a good game has focus on the gameplay and less on the story. That's what we talked about in our game episode, right?
Yeah, I think indeed games focus more on I mean, well, they have to.
Or should, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there are, of course, things that you cannot really turn into a story or you should leave out. Then another thing is that the main character often does all the action.
In video games.
So that would look very lonely on screen.
And all the other people are just there to beg him to help them. So yeah, that's a lot of RPGs.
Yeah, and I think another thing is movie directors simply have picked the wrong movies.
Yeah, they should do that Tetris movie.
Yeah, they said that, and it was a joke, but actually I thought they were serious, because if you see what they're actually turning to movies nowadays, I wouldn't be surprised.
They had an emoji movie.
Yeah.
So
exactly. So why not a Tetris movie? They have a Lego movie. They have all kinds of movies.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
But for example, BioWare games would make great movies. Actually, there's so full of cutscenes that you would just have to cut the actual game and you would have a movie. Wouldn't that be cheap?
I see what you mean. Mass Effect is, would be great for a movie.
Weren't they planning on making a movie out of Mass Effect?
There was talk of that, but now I haven't heard of it for a long time. Now that the game series has sort of crashed and burned, so I'm kind of afraid that studios are afraid to turn it into a movie now.
Yeah, and what about things like The Witcher 3 and Dragon Age 1 would perhaps give problems because of their typical roleplay structure with many side quests. But with a bit of brushing up, you could turn those into great movies, I think.
Yeah, to be honest, the only Star Wars movie that I want to see that doesn't exist yet would be Knights of the Old Republic, the movie.
From the game, yeah.
I want to see that. I don't want to see Episode 9 with more, Kylo Ren, the emo stuff. I'm not interested in that. I want to see Darth Revan and Bastila and what's his face? The guy who reminds me of Bill Pullman. Karth, yeah.
Oh, Karth, yeah. That was my love interest in the game.
He was, yeah. I had Bastila, but She's actually kind of annoying, but well, she's the only pretty girl, so yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, or maybe they should turn Skyrim into a movie. There's been talk about that, but I don't think it would work actually.
The thing about Skyrim is that by its nature, it's very uncinematic. It's very much you are the main character, you control the story, you're free to go where you like. That whole vibe, that whole feel is so typical of Skyrim and of the Elder Scrolls that it wouldn't make a good movie, I think.
It could work if they picked one specific background story and picked one specific quest, like the main quest or the...
I would stay away from quests, and I would simply... If I did an Elder Scrolls movie, I would take something from the lore. The lore is very rich, and make that into a movie. I'd like to see a Diablo movie. That would be really cool, I think.
Wouldn't that be like guys killing each other and looting each other all the time?
No, it would be about a world that is invaded by demons, and this last desperate attempt to save the world from demonic hordes. That might be cool.
I like the looting.
Yeah, I guess you have to put the looting in there also. It's part of the series. Anyway, okay. So comic books.
Yeah, we've talked about that before in the former episode about heroes and superheroes. The adaptations of comic books are usually very dark and gritty and serious and mature and all those silly words.
I'm Batman.
And actually...
Where's the Joker? Sorry.
Thank you for that. I kind of think it violates the loyalty of the Sith rule. The spirits, the ideas, the truths, and the heart of the story. And I think that's why they often don't work for us. Am I wrong?
To be honest, I like a bit of superhero stuff now and then, but I'm just not very big into the genre itself. We had a period when we watched quite a lot of those new Marvel movies on Netflix, and we saw the Avengers and Thor and Civil War, and I noticed that the reason why I don't really enjoy those movies very much is because it's just not really my style. I like atmospheric, mysterious things, and these Marvel movies tend to be set in very ordinary, present-day cities in bright daylight, and just the sense of mystery and wonder is sort of lacking for me. And that's just, I think, part of the genre.
I don't really mind. I really love Superman. I love Batman. And
Batman is
like
different.
The Green Arrow, I really like that. But I think what bothered me about these Avenger movies the most was that it was just a mess when it came to storytelling. The stories were actually all over the place.
Yeah, the second Avengers movies, I really hated that. Age of Ultron, I hated that movie so much. I really, really didn't like it.
I don't actually remember anymore what happened. It was a mess.
It felt like such a huge waste of money and effort and
screen time.
Yeah, it was loud, it was busy, it was annoying. It wasn't for me anyway. Whatever it wasn't for me.
Yeah, but still we kept watching the other sequels because people kept telling us how brilliant they were, and I really didn't see
I enjoyed Guardians of the Galaxy because that was something completely different.
Yeah, that was funny too. It was nice.
I also enjoyed the first Captain America set in World War II. I enjoyed that. But yeah, I guess just the modern day skyscrapers and guys flying around in costumes, that just doesn't do it for me.
Also, maybe they should just take a break from superheroes for a moment, because it's been so much at the same time, one sequel after the other released, that I think people want something else for a change, something new, something original.
I want to see a supernatural Western.
Okay.
Like a Western with some creepy horror fantasy elements.
Didn't you write a short story like that once?
I wanted to, but I never did.
Oh yeah, okay. Maybe you should keep that in mind for future projects.
Yeah.
The queue of future projects that is getting quite endless, actually.
Yeah, I've got to do Word of Wolfen first. It's just it's a bit daunting, to be honest. But let's just do it, man. Okay. Anyway.
Then we have our miscellaneous.
Yes, like Pirates of the Caribbean, which was a theme park ride.
Yeah, and I think it works because what you mentioned earlier, it's loosely based on the characters. It has a lot of character humor. So it's not like they actually took a story and adapted it.
Well, there isn't much of a story in the ride. But what they did, and that was great, is they wrote a really good story for that first Pirates of the Caribbean movie. They set out and constructed this whole plot, and it wasn't just some super simple, straightforward excuse to have some sword fights and cannons. It was a well plotted fantasy adventure.
Right.
And they put in some of the visual elements from the ride as a joke. Like there's this moment when you see a bunch of pirates in a cell and then in a jail, and then there's a dog who has the keys in his mouth and they're trying to lure the dog. That scene is in the movie also. Things like that. That's nice. In fact, even Jack Sparrow actually comments and says, no matter how long you keep trying, that dog is never going to move. Which is what it's like in the ride, of course.
Right. Okay. Actually, although I like the first and the fourth movie best, I think, from the series, they do always come up with a very original story that usually revolves around something you've heard of, something mysterious. A bit like the Indiana Jones movies were based on these artifacts from legends that everyone had heard about and that people had long looked for, like the Holy Grail and the Ark of the Covenant. In Pirates, it's like Davy Jones' Locker and Fountain of Youth, and they always take an element to build their story around that's really atmospheric and that makes you curious and that's mysterious, and I like that about the movies.
I agree. And then we have the toys-based movies. Are
there more than one?
Yeah, well, there's the Lego movie, but didn't they do a Thunderbirds? Well, that was also a TV series.
Yeah, I think with Transformers and the Turtles and Thunderbirds, it's a matter of what was first. Were the toys first? Were the series first? Or was it both? I don't know, actually.
I don't know.
But actually, a movie based on toys is brilliant. And the Lego movie has a great story. It's very funny. They kind of mock our current society. I always love when they do that.
Yeah, me too.
Everything is awesome.
And then, you have the Lego Batman movie, which is a mix of comics and toys and movies and comics and stuff and games.
Carnival
and
suits.
Toys and... Yeah. And
which was nice.
Yeah.
Then we have talked about novels turned into audio dramas, which is actually something we're quite interested in.
Yes, of course. We've mentioned that. What we haven't talked about is audio dramas being turned into movies, because I think a Witch Hunter movie would be quite cool.
Someone make a Witch Hunter movie.
Not just someone.
Please. Peter Jackson.
Yeah, Peter Jackson. Come on, Pete.
Please, Peter Jackson, make a Witch Hunter movie.
You know you want to.
With the Audio Epics project, we started off creating original audio dramas. But the way we work now is that you write the novel and then turn it into a dramatized audiobook, right?
That's true, but I don't change much about the text itself.
A little bit. Yeah.
Very tiny stuff. Like I cut out he said or she said.
Right.
But it's the audio version versus the printed version is almost the same. And then, of course, there's War of the Worlds, which is its own unique thing, maybe. It was a novel first, and then Orson Welles thought, I'm going to do something really original with it, and he did a very loose adaptation and presented it as a newscast on the radio, and people actually thought there was something apocalyptic going on because it was delivered in such a realistic way. And then they turned it into a movie, and then they remade the movie, and now it has Tom Cruise.
Which is nice.
I think he gives a good performance in that movie.
I thought it was genuinely creepy, that movie. Even though there's no gore and spluttering brains or something, but it was just very ominous.
Yeah, it was a nice sort of counterweight to Independence Day, which was this very optimistic, the alien invasion is almost fun in that movie, whereas War of the Worlds was really dark and oppressive, and it was genuinely scary. I liked having those two approaches.
Right, so I guess we can come to the conclusion of our podcast.
Yes, adaptations should be loyal to the Sith.
Yeah, which stands for spirit, ideas, themes, and heart.
And adaptations should be adaptations, not too slavish. I think the first two Harry Potter movies suffer a bit from that.
Yeah, you're right. I think they were trying to... maybe it's because J.K. Rowling was so closely involved and she still had to get used to the new medium, that they really wanted to translate each scene to screen, afraid that something would go lost. But the result actually in the first movie was that it was so very loyal, almost like a copy-paste, that there was things left in the movie that could have been cut out, and near the end you feel like they have to rush things, and then the whole sequence that builds up towards Harry actually finding the Philosopher's Stone is so quick that it kind of loses all the mystery and the great build-up that the novel had. Yeah,
I'm not... I mean, I don't want to bash the movie because I think the director did a good job, but it does drag a bit, and it probably comes from being too close to the book.
I think overall the movies tended to get better near the end.
Yeah, I agree. Actually, the more they started doing their own thing a bit, the better they became, I think.
I think that's often the case. You should really use the advantages of the medium. That's a second thing.
Harry Potter sort of lacks these sort of great, purely cinematic moments that you get in The Lord of the Rings. Like, for example, we talked about the lighting of the beacon scene, but just take a moment like Gandalf in the first movie, in the Fellowship. Gandalf is on Orthanc, on Saruman's tower. He's visited by a moth. He speaks to the moth to give it a message. And then the camera falls from the tower into the pits of Isengard, where you see these goblins forging their weapons. I mean, just that sort of original and dazzling camera work,
right, is
that's something you can only do in a movie, and that's sort of lacking from many movie adaptations.
And that very camera movement was so awesome that it was actually adapted into numerous theme park rides.
Right. The Fall from Isengard theme park ride. Oh, I can see it right now. Yeah.
So that was our conclusion. So adaptations should be loyal to the Sith. Should be an adaptation, not a translation. And they should take advantage of the unique qualities of the medium. So a new version should actually contribute in some way to the story, to the original story.
Right, yeah.
But maybe you have other things in mind that are very important when you adapt a story to screen.
Okay, I'm going to end with one more question. You're a big fan of the Hunger Games, right?
Yeah.
If you have to choose the books or the movies?
That's a very hard choice. I really enjoyed the books a lot. I've read them twice. I thought they were really, really great stories. But I do think, especially when reading them a second time, I noticed that the character of Katniss kind of became very whiny and teenagey and therefore a bit annoying. It went a bit too far, and they kind of fixed that in the movie, which I really appreciate. Then there were these couple of scenes that weren't really clear to me from the passages in the book that they actually translated very well to screen. So overall, I would say, the same thing as for The Lord of the Rings. I think I enjoy both.
That's a cheap answer, but okay.
I have to do.
You gave a good answer. I'm satisfied. Okay, so I hope you've enjoyed this episode.
Please comment if you agree or disagree or have any additions to this podcast. Comment and subscribe, please.
We always appreciate that.
Yeah, and also thank you for the many comments and suggestions that we've read on YouTube. Please keep doing that. It's very, very great to read all those.
Okay, so we'll be back next week. So see you then.